Welcome to today's webinar, New Ways of Working. My name is Niloufar Jamal Khan. I am the Director for Growth and Alliance at Change It All, a boutique change and transformation consultancy firm. I will be host for this evening. We are pleased to have an amazing panel of speakers. Soorya Themudu, HR Director for Asia Pacific at Sodexo, Laura Cole, Head of HR Digital Service and Employee Experience at Standard Chartered Bank, and Sylvain Newton, founder of Newton Consulting, Greater Munich Metropolitan Area. Karunesh Prasad, founder of Change It All, will moderate the event. Thank you to everyone here today, and a special thank you to our speakers for taking time out from their busy schedules. A few housekeeping rules before we start. Please make sure your audio is on mute and your mobile phones on silent during the event. We would love to see you on video, so it would be great if you could keep your videos on. If you have any questions, please put them on the chat window. And just for those who would like to know, this event would be recorded. New way of working, a topic close to everyone's heart. Let's hear what the experts have to say. Over to you, Karunesh.
Thank you, Niloufar, and welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for joining today's session. And like Niloufar said, we have amazing panelists sitting here, and I'm really proud to have Laura, Sylvain, and Soorya, who will be joining us and sharing their perspective. Talking about the discussion for today, the new way of working is what is happening, whether organizations like it or not. We have been forced by the pandemic to actually look at things very differently, try and evolve to a very different way of working. And we are seeing multiple organizations who are consciously making the effort, trying to plan for it, trying to make sure that they are ready to work on the new model and get their people, get their workplace, get their workflow, all of that ready for this. So what I'll do is today's session, I've kind of divided into those three different buckets of what I call work, workforce, and workplace. And with the panelists that we have today, I've selected them very carefully and consciously because I thought they have a lot of good story to tell for all of us to hear about how they have worked with their own organization or their client organization on what can be done to make sure that people are able to adapt the new ways of working. So, of course, the panelists will introduce themselves, but I must share with you, Laura and I know each other from one of the HR Tech conference where we met, and she was talking about Standard Chartered's journey, where she led the entire digital transformation. And I must say, I was very impressed with the kind of work Standard Chartered has done, led by Laura, particularly when I visualize, and I've worked with a lot of banking organizations. We all know banking being so regulated, how difficult it is to be able to transition to those digital tools, work on the flexible model, and still be able to keep the entire thing running. So it'll be wonderful to hear from Laura what journey she has gone through. Sylvain and I know each other for many years. We were together working in Brussels at GE, and Sylvain had a different role at that time, but he also led the learning function for the whole of GE. And then, of course, went to Alliance, another financial services company, and led a fairly large-scale new work models initiatives there. So it'd be good to hear about that. But also, since last few months, Sylvain has been working with multiple other clients, supporting on the same transformation, focused on new work models. So it'd be good to hear what he has to share, and also the experience from other clients that he's supporting. And Soorya, of course, just to give you the perspective, Sodexo has only in APAC region, almost 45,000 employees. And I hope I'm saying the numbers correctly, but that's the kind of scale we are talking about. And not only that, Sodexo also, apart from their own offices, runs multiple other offices and supports their clients, and what perspective therefore Soorya has to bring to the table will be amazing to hear about. So with that, what I'll do is I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves properly instead of me talking about them and steal their thunder. And why don't we start with you, Laura? Why don't you share some of the work you've been doing and also your point of view on this topic of new ways of working?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you very much for having me. So my role is sort of two parts, actually. So the digital services within HR, how do we create and deliver good service into the business? So I have quite a big team that will look at service management, things like voice of customer, also around our tier 0 strategy. So what are we doing around self-service, AI, chatbot, that sort of thing. And I also have accountability for a number of our digital HR platforms, which sort of over the course of the transformation, we've added quite a lot of new ones in over the last couple of years. The other part of my role is employee experience. So I've got a dedicated employee experience team, and that consists of UX designers who will go out and do a lot of EX research and talk to colleagues about a whole range of different topics and experiences within the employee life cycle. I think really relevant, which we'll obviously talk about over the course of the webinar, but a big focus for us at Standard Chartered last year and the sort of program that I led from employee experience perspective was implementing flexible and hybrid working and under a program that we called Future Workplace Now. And like I say, I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've been at the bank, it's gone so fast actually, but 4 years nearly now, based in Singapore, and sort of prior to that, 5 years in Hong Kong. And then you can probably tell from my accent, originally from the UK, although I haven't lived there for nearly 10 years, which in itself is crazy. Like I say, my sort of interest, I think, in this topic has really been, and what we've been doing at Standard Chartered is rethinking how and where work gets done. And I think for lots of organisations, COVID was the experiment I don't think any of us were necessarily expecting, or I don't know if we would say we were wanting it, but it's been a great opportunity, and sort of that phrase of with every crisis there's an opportunity. I think we've definitely done that at the bank to really use it to rethink, and I think we've shown over the last year people can work more flexibly, they can work from home and still get things done. So for us, it's very much been partnering with our colleagues as well in property and technology. So it's very much been an initiative driven by those three functions, but kind of led by HR. And I think that's also been the differentiator for us too, is that we've looked at that experience end to end across the organisation, as opposed to, I think, historically, you might have just looked at it from a HR perspective. And I think that's a bit remiss, because for colleagues across the organisation, they don't care who owns that part of the process. All they care about is that a good experience. So for us, it's very much been an employee experience led journey, and I'm sort of happy to talk through that in the course of the webinar as well. So yeah, really excited to discuss this topic.
Thank you so much. I'm really very excited to have you on this panel today. So thank you so much. And I look forward to talk more about this. Coming to you, Sylvain, why don't we allow you to introduce yourself to the group and also talk about some of your experiences and perspective both.
Thank you, Karunesh. Yes, and thanks for having me here. Sylvain Newton, as you said, I was leading the learning activity for GE, then moved to Allianz, where I, in my last role, built the New Work initiative for the group. And we started quite at an early stage doing that in May last year, when we were at the time in our first lockdown and trying to understand the positive impact, as Laura said, that the crisis had on the company. Despite all the tragic aspect of the crisis that we are still experiencing, there are positive impact, and we wanted to capitalize on them and make sure that they wouldn't fade away once the crisis element that brings people together would be gone. And so we started that initiative. I led it for about 8 months, built the concept, the strategy, and then felt like it's a great time to bring those ideas to other companies. And that's what made me go building my consultancy. And now I'm helping customers to do that. And I'm glad we are speaking today, Karunesh, because new work is a huge change process at the end of the day. So all the things you do with change at all is exactly what we need now to help company on new work. And what I see with new work is that most companies have used the past 6 to 8 months to put in place a few elements. But I think we are now at an inflection point where some countries, I think the US, I think obviously China is ahead, but are planning what they call the return to the office. And with it, it's an interesting word, return to the office. I heard as well return to work, which make me kind of get scared because I don't think anybody was on holiday so far. We were all working very hard. So they call it return to the office. And even that word is a bit scary because I don't think we should go back to the office and I don't think we should return to anywhere. We should fit forward to a better stage, a better way of working. And for me, it's exciting because it's accelerating all the things we've been pushing for many years, all of us working in HR. So it's more empowering the employee, it's giving them more flexibility, it's creating leaders who have a high level of empathy, it's using technology to help us achieve that. So it's really exciting time. And I'm glad I can help customers doing that for their own organization.
Thank you, Sylvain. This is great, and I think from the people point of view, I think it's a big transition which is happening, and would love to hear some of your perspective as you go into the discussion further. Coming on to you, Soorya, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we talk about your perspective as well.
Thanks, Karunesh. So Soorya Themudu is my name. I'm a biochemist by training, so I do have 20 years of experiences to date. And all my experiences has been in HR space. Obviously, my work has taken me to almost all countries in Asia Pacific region. I spent bulk of my time in GE. Today, I'm attached to Sodexo, a worldwide leader in quality of life services, backed by 450,000 employees globally. So I head the HR function for Asia Pacific region, where we have close to 70,000 employees, Karunesh, right? So in addition to my work, I also champion diversity and inclusion initiatives. It's actually part of our DNA. On a personal front, I'm married with 2 boys, and I love sports or anything that can get me moving. So again, I'm truly honored to be here today to engage in the new way of working's discussion, as I guess it is actually a topic that is in everybody's mind, right? And in fact, it is. I mean, I always say it's not future way of working or it's not new way of working, but it is today's world, today's way of working or now way of working, right? My perspective, I believe we need to adopt hybrid model to attract and keep top talent. One can work in an office a fraction of the time, connecting with colleagues, engaging with managers, and collaborating on new ideas. But there also have to be autonomy to arrange their own schedules, right? Which reduces the commuting time and creates more space for their personal lives. Now, and I think what is the biggest challenge is implementing this. There are many questions to ask. Who works remotely? On what days? If employees are never in the office, are the remuneration going to be the same? How do you manage a team that is not together? But I think the most important thing, it's not the what, but the how. It's about changing the mindset and behaviors of our people and our leaders. I think that is the key to any of this, right? Now, I personally assume that we have to adopt a hybrid model to attract and keep top talent. Now, I might be right, but I also know that this would only be, this will only work if I get it right? So, and hence I'm here to share my experiences, but also to learn from all of you.
Thank you, Soorya. This is great, and I'm really, really excited about what this discussion is going to be like today because of the different perspective which comes in from 3 different panelists that we have. And I'm coming back to Laura once again, because when I was visualizing what Laura was talking about, the work, the way it is being performed today, and to be in a seat where Laura has the responsibility to look at employee experience on one side, digital on the other side, making sure that it all comes together as an experience for the employees. And Laura, why don't you kind of bring it alive for the audience here in terms of what exactly are you focusing on? What exactly have you done in terms of the transition, the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome that? So maybe you can kind of paint a picture of how does it look like in real terms, the transition that you are bringing in here.
Sure. I think a lot of organisations and Standard Chartered was probably no different prior to COVID, that when we often talked about time in the office, it was sort of based on occupancy and how many people would be going in. And as I said, sort of with the COVID pandemic, it was an opportunity really, I think, to rethink how and where work gets done. And we started our programme of work really thinking about the job roles that people did and the job families that they were in. And to your point about working in a heavily regulated environment, there are certain roles, if you're a retail branch staff, you're not going to be able to do that role working from home because you need to be in a branch. There's other roles where we sort of believe that they would be better suited to being in the office, roles like traders, for example. So for us, we very much started the work that we did last year focusing on job families and using that to kind of help initially guide almost the size of the prize, in the sense of how much flexibility when we think of hybrid in terms of time and location. And that's what we really think of at the bank when we talk about flexibility. We're talking about location, so whether you would work at home or in the office, or actually we do have third-party locations as well, and then the time angle. And there might be some flexibility depending on role that could be for time but not for location. So we sort of started with that as an initial point, and then really very quickly mobilized a whole program of activity and work around how could we really operationalize this. And I think when I sort of talk to other organizations, that's the kind of sticking point, because we very fairly early on, like we weren't one of the first organizations to kind of come out and say hybrid's our position. We did, and this is sort of where my team really came into its own, is we did a lot of research with employees, and we sort of did multiple surveying, lots of pulse surveys. We also ran something called an expression of interest process, and that was where we asked colleagues to state their preferences in terms of time and location flexibility. And we also sort of approached it with a view, because the bank operates in sort of 60 odd markets, so we sort of started with 9 of our kind of core markets where we have the highest population of people, and that was kind of the focus as well. So for us, it was kind of very much employee led, but also doing that kind of, we used to sort of refer to it as a top down, bottom up approach, whereby the kind of bottom up was colleagues giving us their view and sort of feedback in terms of how did they want to work, the number of days they might want to work from home, the sort of flexi working patterns they might want to do. And then it was sort of the business view, which is the sort of top down in terms of job families and the way in which people could work. And what we sort of found consistently with all of those pulse surveys was it ended up being about 80% of colleagues wanted some form of flexibility, and that was either time flexibility or location flexibility. And what was quite interesting too is it kind of kept coming out that hybrid was what people wanted. And that was I think because the acknowledgement that when you work from home, there's opportunity for more flexibility, there's opportunity for you to manage your day in a certain way. You know, if you've got childcare commitments, you're able to be around for more of those kind of things. People can exercise more, we sort of saw that, but also that there was that view that we also need to come into the office, and that's for about building connection, collaborating with colleagues. There was a big campaign that we also ran as part of our initiative, which was called the Water Cooler Challenge. And that was using our SC Ventures arm of the business, which is our kind of like startup branch. And that was very much about crowdsourcing with colleagues, ideas for how we could facilitate connection that you would have in the office, but doing that virtually. And with that sort of program of work, there was the biggest number of ideas sort of ever submitted with a kind of crowdsourcing program that we ran. And we've got some really cool ideas come out of that. So, you know, apps and lots of ways in which you can get people to connect together. So for us, like I say, it was very much a a sort of concerted effort to very quickly mobilize with a very programmatic approach. And that sort of lasted for 10 months, and literally February time, we then opened up applications for colleagues to apply for flexible working arrangements. And with effect from 1st of April, we've now got in 8 of our top markets, 84% of colleagues on a flexible hybrid working arrangement, which given pre-COVID, we had 700 people on flexible working arrangements. We've now got 38,000. Like that's a kind of significant step forward, I think, in terms of what we've been able to achieve.
Wow, huge scale and a lot of different things. I can see that you guys have worked on multiple different interventions to be able to arrive at this. But as you were talking, Laura, one thought that came to my mind was the whole concept of no one size fits all. And when you provide flexibility to people, and you're talking about time as well as location flexibility, there's bound to be some kind of a conflict between different team members, they wanting to work at different time, at different location, and therefore collaboration becomes even more difficult. Would you just put some spotlight on this aspect of the conversation, that how did you manage some of those clashes, or if I may use the word clash here, that what did you see and how did you deal with that, in other words?
So I think probably 2 things. So that was where the expression of interest process was really important, because what it did is it allowed colleagues to be able to give their preferences, and what we were able to give people leaders was effectively a dashboard which would show what their different team members had selected, and that would be able to be rolled up into the sort of overall business unit. What that meant is the businesses had certain positions, I think, in terms of, as I said, certain roles where people could work, etc. But kind of getting that insight and data in terms of colleagues' preferences meant that conversations could happen early on between colleagues and people leaders to say, yes, this arrangement will work, or no, it won't, or actually, I've got my team done their expression of interest, and actually I've seen that 5 of them all want to go into the office on different days. And then the whole point was that they would then have those conversations about, okay, I can see it, there's this degree of flexibility that people want, but we're going to need to agree the days that we go in. And it also meant that we could give that data to our property colleagues who were looking at kind of capacity planning, who's going to be going into the office, when, etc. The other that we've kind of been looking at as part of our culture squad, and this is kind of really come into its own post people moving on to these flexible working arrangements, is also developing what we call rules of engagement. So that has been where, what is it in terms of the type of work that colleagues are doing that means either they should do that work at home or they go into the office. And that's really where we're saying, if you want to run a design sprint, or you're going to get together for a team meeting, or you've got a workshop, those are the types of things that we would recommend doing face-to-face where you can. But actually, if you're going to do your emails, or you've got a whole day of whatever conferencing platform calls that you use, you can do those at home. So that's also, I think, really helped the kind of rules of engagement with colleagues and people leaders to sort of understand how is it we're going to work, and sort of how do we marry, I think, colleague expectations behind, we obviously still need to run our business, right? So I think they've been kind of the 2 things that we sort of really focused on.
Exciting. Thank you so much, Laura. I'm coming on to you, Soorya, now. And when you were talking about diversity and inclusion, and also talking about the way different teams are working, and as Laura spoke about, the flexibility of the hybrid model, expression of interest from employees. One of the trends that I'm seeing is that a lot of companies may not need the same office setup anymore, right? They will probably want to downsize. They will not have the same kind of facility size. What are you guys seeing? What are you seeing, and how are you making that transition at this point of time?
Thanks, Karunesh. So if you look at it, in fact, there are a lot of organizations, including Sodexo, right? Even before pre-COVID, we were looking at, the ways of working, right? So in fact, in some of our offices and so forth, it is more, we do have an open space where we have this concept of, 1/3, in fact, half of the office is more like a lounge. So for people to come and just collaborate, get together and so forth. And in fact, we already have this flexible work arrangement even prior to COVID-19, right? Prior to crisis. But then in some countries, especially like if you go to China, for example, in China, people believe in coming back to work and they have to be physically sitting in the office. So because of cultural differences, we were having some challenges in terms of embracing or giving that flexibility. But of course, the crisis has just accelerated everything, right? So people who were not able to close books now are able to close book virtually. People who are not able to process payroll, they are able to process payroll virtually, right? So all these things are possible, and it's actually just accelerating, right? So in terms of, if you look at from an office space perspective, it's for Sodexo itself, we are actually, of course, if you look at it, we are looking at, how, some of our offices, if you look at it, it is designed in a manner that it is very collaborative. And if you look at it, it is also, a lot of things are contactless. For example, when you go into the office, robots will be actually greeting you. It's actually facial recognition, no more pressing buttons and so forth. Sometimes when you want to call leave, you call using a smartphone rather than, touching the button, pressing the buttons and so forth. Even making bookings, right? Bookings of meeting rooms and all that. It's all becoming, you digitize everything. Even, as you know, that Sodexo, we are into facility management and as well as food management, right? So we provide food and if you look at our clients, they comprise of hospitals, schools, universities, name it, offshore mining sites, big corporations, multinationals and so forth. So, the way we present even food has changed a lot, drastically in the last 12 months. We use sometimes vouchers, gift vouchers, right? So you have to evolve because not everyone come to the office. People are working from home and so forth. So you now provide not just one set of menu, but a variation of services, right? So that a user, so it's more again, as like what Laura is saying, it's about users' experience. It's about employee experience, right? So if they are there, they want to have meals. So it's become contactless. You have this huge fridge. You call using a mobile phone and it opens. You take the food that you want. It gets deducted, and then you have the meal. Or if you're sitting at home, you use, for example, just last week we have a partnership with Uber Eats. So you can use Uber Eats because we've partnered with them. So this is a variation of services that we are basically offering, Karunesh.
Very exciting, actually. The way technology is being used here to bring the workplace, make it different, and also to take care of the risks that people have of, interacting or touching things or being able to. The food example is great of how the digital methodology is being used. And I couldn't complete my question earlier, Soorya. From diversity and inclusion perspective, do you see any shift? Are you changing the way you were focusing on this topic? Are you seeing something different happening now? Because literally the interaction is very different. And also the leaders who were focusing on this topic, bringing the people together, if they are not working in office, working from home. Of course, it changes a lot, but what is changing particularly from the approach that you were taking before to now?
So I guess I think, rather than talking about diversity, I think inclusion matters a lot, especially during this crisis. I'm proud to say that Sodexo, we are actually a global, I mean, we embrace D&I. In fact, we are a benchmark organization for a lot of companies in terms of gender and diversity and inclusion. We do a lot of things in terms of, you know, hiring a diverse pool, and that's still, you know, and that's, we do everything we can to make sure that, you know, the processes are embedded into the ways of working, right? So that, you know, it doesn't get slipped. However, you are absolutely right. During this crisis, inclusion becomes very important, right? Because, you know, even, I mean, I'll give you an experience that I personally faced. A lot of the time in the beginning when the crisis was actually taking place, right? We thought, you know, especially we said, oh, mothers, you know, or mothers who are at home with the children, they have to work, they have to care for the children and so forth. So there was a lot of initiatives and a lot of promotion to make sure that, you know, we give that flexibility, we promote, we embrace, you know, talking about, you know, creating the environment or designing the workplace that allows that flexibility for women. You know, after a few months, then it daunted on me that even people who are single, because they are locked down in a, you know, in a confined place, they have been affected as well, right? So and that's the reason sometimes I always tell myself, we cannot make assumptions. So a lot of the time when we are doing things, we actually socialize with our employees, because our employees are diverse employees, right? So we try to make sure that, you know, as what Laura was saying, a survey, we will get their input, right? We will go in, we socialize with them. And when you're socialized with them, you're socializing with the broader population. So when you get the insights, then you realize the solutions or the policies are not one size fit all, right? You have to flex it, right? So that's how, you know, that's some of the things that we have been doing, and we've always tell our leaders to keep that in mind, Karunesh.
Amazing. I think there's a lot to learn from some of these things, and right enough, you know, what Laura was talking about, the employee experience here, bringing it alive with the example that you gave about the individuals and the families and the people with kids. All of them have very different requirements, and the inclusion becomes even more important in this scenario because, yeah, again, no one size fits all. So ultimately, one has to take care of those. Amazing. Selva, in terms of organization, one of the thing I'm hearing from many companies, that is the readiness of the people. Of course, they want to work with their flexibility, the hybrid model. Work is being performed very differently, but depending on what kind of work people do, they have different needs to be in the office or not in the office. But in light of that, I'm also seeing that the leaders have very different ways of working, you know, as individuals. Now, each leader will have a preference. Some people work much better with face-to-face interactions, so they are pushing their employees to be on calls, available at certain times so that they can, you know, work with them. There are other leaders who are providing much more, you know, flexibility to their people. But as an organization, everybody needs to have some kind of a capability building activity here on what to equip the employees with and also what to equip the leaders with. With your experience, I would love to hear your point of view on how do you suggest employers to work on that capability building, particularly from the attitude, the skill set, the mindset point of view, and what culture therefore needs to evolve in the organization. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Karunesh. And if you don't mind, I wanted to come back briefly to what Soorya said, because there were two fascinating points that in itself could be a whole hour discussion, but just a quick comment. One was around your comment on Uber Eats, and I think it's going to want the flexibilization of benefits. Because most companies typically in HR have given benefits to employees centered around a location. So you would come to that location and you would have, I don't know, the fitness center, you would have the canteen, you would have a shop where you could buy stuff. And you've seen that developed as well a lot in the new economy, where the office was a center of gravity, where almost you could live from there. And not need to be anywhere else. And you could have a kindergarten and a dentist and all those things. And now if you think some of those people, not everybody and not fully, but will tend to work more and more from other places, which could be home or third places that are evolving, shared spaces, for example, then how do you change your HR benefit strategy to match that? So take the example, you work from home. Well, you don't have the canteen, you don't have the fitness center, you can't bring your children to the kindergarten close to that place. So what happened? Do you get a voucher? Do you get another benefit? Do you get a payment? I think companies still have static HR benefit model that need to be flexibilized to meet this new work model. And then you mentioned diversity, which is a super important topic. And Soorya, you talk about socializing in the office, and that's a super important effect of going to the office every day. And you hear more and more discussion about loneliness right now, because people, some of them, they are not with maybe a partner, with children, with elderly, they might be alone somewhere. And you have loneliness, which means you have more depression, you've got more mental health issue. You see radicalization of political view because you have less exchange and debate and people putting you back into some rationality with your thought and all those things happening. And for time, going to the office has been a way to socialize as well for women in many places in the world. And so we have to think, if that happened less, what is the compensation? And hopefully the new work is a healthy balance between the office and the flexibility of working remotely. So wanted to build on that, Soorya, because I think you made great points on those topics. So if I go back to your question, Karunesh, about capability building, which is a topic you know I love, and I'm thinking about almost three audiences for capability building. You mentioned the leader. Obviously, they have to rethink their leadership style. Because most of them have been leading in a, let's say, analog way. And we need them to be able to lead in a location agnostic way, which means it doesn't matter where you are, I'm going to be able to lead you, to engage you, to listen to you, to set objectives, to give you performance feedback, to shape a vision, to excite you for something, independently from where you are. And that requires skills that I don't think every leader already has. At Allianz, we built a so-called a license to lead, which is a kind of leadership passport that you have to acquire, and that equips you with the skills to do that. And when it was before the crisis, and now we are adapting the content to make sure that it gives you the skill to do that either face-to-face or remotely. But that's one of the solutions you can leverage to help your leaders, because right now it's a The second audience I was thinking of are employees. So all your employees, they need new capabilities. And before the crisis, we were already working on upskilling and reskilling due to the digitalization and the disruption on the market. But we now need to accelerate that. And we see organization more resilient for the future. For the next crisis that will come when Corona is over, for sure there will be the next one. And if you have an organization where all a strategy and there is a target picture of some skills you need to acquire. And then to conclude, I think there is the team as well as a unit of performance. It's not only the employee, it's not only the leader. Like you said before, Karunesh, there is some negotiation that needs to take place between, well, I want to that doesn't work. So there is a level of negotiation we need to do. And so one of the things we've been doing at Allianz is to think about helping the teams come through this process of moving from old work to new work. And that's a change management process. So we use peer learning, we use an IT platform, but helping the team as well through that process. So building capability of leaders, of employee, but of teams as well.
This is really fascinating, Sylvain. I like the way you kind of clubbed those three groups of employees, leaders, and the working group, the working unit. And yeah, I think it certainly requires very different type of interaction. And your example on the Netflix type of learning platform is certainly the need of the day to day, because again, no one size fits all. People need to kind of look at what different requirements they have individually and also as a working unit, and therefore what can be done there will be really fascinating. Laura, employee experience, and on that topic particularly, two things come to my mind, and I want to hear your point of view on this. So one is the learning part of what Sylvain talked about, Netflix type of learning program. And I'm also visualizing when we're talking about back to work or back to office concept now, there's a need for a different type of onboarding or re-onboarding for employees as of today, right? So each employee needs a slightly different way of getting re-onboarded to the new structure, new office, or different way of working. And the cycle time to get them onboarded again is very short because they are not coming new to the workplace. They have been there, so there are certain ways of working which is already set in their mind. When we think of our office, we think of certain things which is already in our head. What challenges did you see, and what did you do about this aspect? It'll be good to hear from your point of view.
So I think organizations need to think about digital first. And when you talk to quite a lot of the consultancies, like the big four, that's kind of what they're starting to think about in terms of packages that they're trying to work with organizations. And how we've sort of looked at that at Standard Chartered is my team do a lot of mapping of the end-to-end employee journey and mapping out those experiences of engage with employees, and from that you can sort of map out what are the key moments that matter. But what we're trying to do now is, against that sort of employee journey and some of those moments, actually then map out which ones need to be face to face or would be would kind of benefit more from being face to face, versus which ones do we kind of have to look at that digital first lens. And I think good point around onboarding, that's definitely one where you see the need, I think, for organizations, if they weren't already doing it pre-COVID, they're definitely going to have to do it now to sort of pivot that onboarding so that you can bring people in a virtual environment. But that's where I also go back to what is it that we want offices to be going forward, and how would organizations use that space? Because what we've also seen with example like onboarding is there's almost different demographics at play too. So you sort of see in some of the research that if you have employees that are early careers, starting out, they might be joining a grad program or apprenticeship. Typically, they would want more face time in the office because that's where you would, see job shadowing. It's where you would be able to learn more on the job. You would be able to meet coaches and sort of mentors in the office, versus if you're perhaps more of an experienced hire who maybe doesn't need that kind of on the job training, but would still need some of that connection. So I think it kind of goes back to, like we said, making sure we as organizations, and we're starting to do this, like I say, at the bank, understanding which of those experiences need to work in a kind of digital virtual environment, and what is the reason for bringing people together in the office. And I think that then means that the sort of shape and what the office looks like has to be quite different. So I think now you'll see if they weren't kind of fitted out this way before, having office spaces that encourage collaboration, that also allow connection, social hubs, and beyond just even kind of meeting colleagues for coffee, but offering health and wellness, yoga, those kind of things. I think you really sort of have to see that pivot. So for us, like I say, it's been very much about selecting the experiences that we think really should still be face-to-face where they can be, and then also trying to digitize as much as possible other experiences so that you can make those work in that sort of hybrid way.
Great. Thank you, Laura. The two things which are playing on my mind right now, and as I'm hearing all of you, it's getting reinforced further. I'm tempted to ask this question. I'll ask you, all three of you, to respond to this for the audience. One thought that comes to my mind is hybrid work model. There are people who are dispersed time-wise and location-wise, and the word collaboration, which is the way organizations work. Without collaboration, there's no organization. And I would like to get your perspective, all three of you, one by one, on what does collaboration mean in the new world of work, because this is looking very different now. What are some of the best practices or examples of what you guys might be doing in the organization or your client's organization that you want the audience to take away from today's session? So Sylvain, why don't you start, and then I'll come back to Soorya and Laura also on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Karunesh. And so collaboration obviously has been one of the big challenges we faced recently, with people being dispersed and not seeing each other as much as they used to do. I think we've seen challenges dependently on the type of task people were doing. So if you have a job which is more a routine job, and let's say the network of stakeholders that you have to engage with is pretty stable, it's quite easy to work remotely in that context, because you know the people know you, you know how to reach them. So there is a certain continuity, if you want. When you are more into transformation role, and from what I'm hearing from Soorya and Laura, that's the things they do, then you are used to work in a much more unstable environment, and a new project hits you, a new stakeholder, people you have to get to know. That's much harder to do in a remote environment, and we've seen people struggling more with that. So the bigger, let's say, the scope of people you have to interact with, the more it changes, the harder it is to do in a remote setup. But I think what's important in your question, Karunesh, is you mentioned the hybrid working. So it's not where we are right now, and that's super important to keep in mind. We are in an emergency lockdown, most of us. That's not the future of work. That's crisis of work. And so what we hope to be able to shape, and that's super important, I think we are at an inflection point where companies need now to decide, what do I want as a future of work? And their employee will expect an answer from them. They are going back to the office, some of them. It's not only making that back to the office an exciting moment. I think companies need to think about making that something special, but it's using that time as well to say, what do I want as a company to offer to my employee in the future? I think employees expect that, but your candidates expect that. So you need to build that as well in your employer value proposition. And that hybrid of work, or whatever you want to call that, new work model, future way of working, or whatever, is a well-designed balance of face-to-face and remote interaction. And so depending on what kind of collaboration you need, Karunesh, at some point, you can be more intentional about, where do I go to get that done? Do I go to the office today because I need to meet with Laura and Soorya, and I really need to have that kind of personal exchange? And we go to some places that are designed to enhance collaboration, social encounter, innovation, etc. And that's what the office will increasingly enable us to do. Or do I need to be more remote because I need more quiet time, or because I know you so well, Karunesh, that we connect digitally and we can collaborate very well? So I think that's what I call the rise of intentionality. I'm not just going to the office by default every day like I have done for 20 years. I decide where I need to go depending on what I need to do. And I think in that context, collaboration will continue to thrive. personally or through technology.
Wonderful. Great points here, Sylvain. Soorya, why don't we hear from you? How are you managing the collaboration, or what are your thoughts on what could be done here?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is that you collaborate. I mean, when I talk about collaboration here, it is about building relationship. It's about building trust. It's about the emotional connection, right? And to have that, I mean, you need to have that emotional connection, the trust, the relationship before so that you can actually have a seamless collaboration, right? And for that to happen, you need to have some form of face-to-face or physical presence, right? So if everybody does work remotely 100% of the time, to me, I'm not saying that you will not be able to collaborate remotely. You can collaborate remotely, right? But however, it is a lot easier, I think, if you have built that trust, that relationship, that emotional connection, that will actually translate into an easier collaboration, right? Easier to influence. So especially when you are in a senior leadership meeting or HR meeting and so forth, when you have, if you do, when you discuss things about strategy and so forth, right? It is a lot, I think, to me personally, if I have people around me, to talk, to bounce ideas, to even go for a lunch together, do the small talks. So it's not just about knowing them, it's connecting with them, coaching them. I think it will bring a lot of value. So therefore, I feel, we probably, in my opinion, again, it's my opinion, right? So, the hybrid model is where we should be going towards, because one is, the collaboration happened in the office. And also at the same time, you're empowering your employees to work remotely, so that they will be able to manage their schedule. They're reducing their travel time. And then they also have, they'll be able to also manage their personal lives, right? So, so that's basically my view, Karunesh.
Yeah. No, thank you. This is great, and I'm just thinking about the fact that traditionally we all have used lunch, drinks, water cooler discussion for informal chat that we have always done, and all that has changed completely, and therefore we are hoping that some kind of hybrid model will help people to be able to come together from time to time. And that's where I think what one can do in these situations to transition. And Laura, coming to you, would love to hear some of your thoughts, and also what kind of digital interventions can be made here, which can actually help people collaborate despite of the fact that they're spending more time working from different locations or whatever. So love to hear your thoughts on collaboration specifically.
Sure. So I think one of the things that we're looking at the bank in terms of how would we make sure now we've got colleagues on flexible and hybrid working arrangements that they're actually working and we land there as well. We're looking across the year at a hybrid working festival, and that would basically be a series of initiatives that would help both people leaders and colleagues to sort of move more towards this way of working. So it might be things like, if you're running a video meeting, how do you make sure that's inclusive? How do you pick up, for example, on cues that if you were seeing somebody more often face to face, you would maybe pick up if they were not having the best time, or there might be things happening for them at home. How you can kind of pick up on some of those things, even if you're then spending more time emailing colleagues than perhaps you used to. So we're sort of looking at by market some targeted interventions that will really help people leaders and colleagues. I think to kind of build on what some of the other panelists have said, I think investment in some really good collaboration tools is really important. And by that, I don't just mean like a kind of video conferencing platform. Using and sometimes I don't think they probably fully replicate always the experience of being face to face, when you could kind of get everybody in a room and post it and things like that. But how you're sort of able to use tools like Mural, Trello, other sort of tools like that then encourage virtual post-its and kind of collaboration in that way, and the ability for colleagues to sort of connect with each other. I think the other is also, we talked about, it might have been the lunches or the dinners after work, but actually putting some of those in. So increasingly now I'm seeing our kind of business leaders start to pilot things like a virtual drop-in hour, and that just means they open up whatever video conferencing platform, and people in the team can just decide to pop by, and sometimes nobody joins, but actually sometimes you might get 5-10 people joining, and they'll just sort of have an informal conversation. And then the final point I'd say is where organizations can, I think, also investing in organization network analysis, because I think that will really help to understand how are employees actually connecting and collaborating across the organization. And there's obviously big players like Microsoft, but there's also smaller firms as well that offer that kind of functionality and capability. And I think what we've seen that's really interesting during the pandemic was that actually, and I think it's sort of reinforced externally too, that intra team collaboration actually was fine, but it was the inter team. So, and I think some of that kind of comes from not necessarily bumping into people anymore, and those kind of things of that sort of serendipitous connection. So I would also say for organizations to think about how can you use data to help inform the relationships and connections that colleagues might be making as well.
Amazing. I think there are a lot of multiple good ideas here of what potentially organizations can do. And right enough, Laura, I think technology is one aspect, but there's much more to it than just technology here, which is what I'm hearing here. While we are doing our conversation, audience, if you have any question, feel free to post it on the chat also, so that the respective panelists can share their inputs on that. And I'm coming back to our conversation again. One thought on my mind was that Sylvain made a point about we are in pandemic right now. This is crisis. We are not yet there in terms of a real hybrid model. So what organizations are doing today is kind of coping with that crisis, depending on the organization setup, their culture, their people, their infrastructure, and they're doing the best that they can. But I think one is to keep pace with what's happening around us, and one is to prepare for the future. Now, not knowing what the future looks like, it becomes even more difficult to be able to get ready for that. What I want to stress, or I want to understand from the panelists here, is two aspects. One is that if we fast forward, let us say 12 to 18 months from now, the kind of workforce planning we need to do, the kind of performance management system we need to have, the kind of leadership abilities or capabilities we need to have, the kind of change management skills we need to have, also probably will look very different. Similar on the whole employee experience assumptions that we make, the journey that we carve out, the personas that we create, a lot of them will look probably very different in future. How are you seeing, or how are you suggesting your clients to cope with or get ready for the future to remain competitive and be able to actually cope with the entire transition? So I'm back to you, Sylvain, to talk about what kind of processes or HR processes or people processes organizations need to build. And I'm talking about particularly in the area of things like workforce planning, performance management, and so on, so that organizations can get ready for that. And then, of course, we'll hear this also from Laura and Soorya on what you are seeing. So let's start with Sylvain on this topic, please.
When we started the crisis unit at Allianz to deal with the situation. That was really in the early, when was that? The early phase of the pandemic, end of February 2020, if I recall. But that's rapidly evolved into, and that was in May when I started working on the new work model last year, that rapidly evolved into the group crisis unit manage both the current crisis, but the future of work hand in hand. And we started doing that last May. In fact, I think Allianz was one of the first mover, exactly to your point, Karunesh, realizing that, yes, we have to deal with the crisis, but equally important, we have to think about the post-crisis, at least the post-corona crisis time. And so doing both hand in hand was something we did from the start. The other thing that I have been pushing companies when we talk about new work to do is to start setting goals right now. And that's something we did early on at Allianz. And many said, but how do you want me to set a goal? I don't know what's going to unfold. So for example, percentage of remote working versus office work, or percentage of reduction of travel. I mean, all those kind of things you want to ideally put a metric so that you can drive progress, but as well you make serious to your company that it's not about incremental change. It's a dramatic change we are trying to do. So it's not about reducing travel by 5%. It's reducing travel by 30%, by 40%, by 50%. So really showing it's a complete change of the way we work. And that's where I think setting up metrics soon and early, even though you don't know where we are going, is a way to make a statement. And then, of course, you keep measuring where you stand, and you might need to adapt as things unfold because we are learning as we go forward. So that's one part of the answer. I think the other part, what we are trying to do is to stay close to the employees and to stay close to them, to listen to them in terms of what they want, what they need. So I think that using pulses to keep checking with employees how they are doing, do they feel we are supporting them the right way, what else do they need, is a good way to feed us back with data around what else we need to do and how we need to adapt and change the evolution of the new work model. And then the other tool you mentioned, Karunesh, so you think about performance management, you think of strategic workforce planning, you think of learning. I mentioned the HR benefits before. I think all of that, we were already working on transforming them. So you hear, for example, if we pick one, performance management, you've been hearing about continuous performance management, which means instead of having a discussion once a year where the manager gives feedback to the employee, we have permanent flow of feedback throughout the year. You've been hearing that for 10 years already now. But I think not every organization had made the change. And I think in that respect, Corona played a role of accelerating some trends we had seen. And so all of that we keep pushing. We keep building capability faster, changing the way we do performance management. But I think, as you said, we don't know the answer, and keeping asking, doing pulses, but still having a goal that you push for is a fine line we are trying to walk right now.
Awesome. I think that they are all great points, Sylvain, you mentioned, and it resonates a lot with me. Soorya, why don't we come to you on the same topic? And of course, larger scale, larger number of people. I'm sure you are going through a lot as well. So tell me about your experiences and what you're doing right now.
Yeah. So thanks, Karunesh. I think before I go to, before I address the HR part, right? There are a lot of things that we are doing, right, in Sodexo. And I think I've mentioned this around, receptionist. Do we need a receptionist, right? Can we have a, for example, some of our offices, we actually have robots, right? Booking meeting rooms. It's all, it's all through an iPad. It's through smartphones and so forth. Even things like audit, for example, right? So audits, it's highly regulated. Our organization is also highly regulated, like especially, around safety. So, but your auditors will not be able to travel because of this COVID and so forth, right? In the past, they need to actually travel. They always say they have to travel, but today, when you don't have, life becomes simpler when you don't have choices, right? So So now when you don't have, you cannot travel, what happened is that we have smart glasses, right? So for example, if I need to audit someone in India, an employee or a colleague of mine will use these smart glasses, and I could actually view everything, and I could actually do my audit virtually. So all these tools are actually coming in. So therefore, your travels and everything is actually, you don't need to travel where you used to travel. Now, there's a reduction. Not for us, we are talking about, you start as a baseline of 50% and then you go below, right? So it should be anything less than 50% from the baseline. So these are the things about new way of working and so forth. And the other things I think Sylvain has actually touched in terms of, listening to our employees. So in fact, we have embarked on it before even COVID, but it becomes, we're accelerating it a lot further. I mean, I'm sure all of you would have heard this employee engagement survey that a lot of companies will do once every 2 years. But right now you could actually, I mean, for us in Sodexo, we call it voice. So it's our voice of our employees. So you could actually just listen to per site or by function, or you could take once every 3 months, once every 6 months. So all these things is changing because you want to hear what is in their mind in that moment. Right. So for example, if I wake up in the morning and if I want to know all my direct reports, how they are feeling, I just go to the system and enable it, and it will send a survey, right, to all of them to see how they are feeling on that day. So it's in the moment feedback, right? So that's from a voice perspective. And you talked about performance management. It's not a year process. And I think this is basically something that we have been already talking about it. But some of the other ideas that I've been thinking about, what if we don't have annual leaves, for example? People just take if they want to go on leaves, right? So these are some of the ideas that's actually coming. And we obviously, ideas creations are there, but we have to see how we can implement it, because we do have labor laws and regulations and so forth, and how we can implement this within that framework.
Wonderful. And some really great ideas here. I can see what Sodexo is doing with grabbing the opportunity to create some very best in class kind of tools or support system, which will be actually very beneficial for the organizations to use. Great. Laura, coming to you on the same topic, I just want to wrap this up because I can see a lot of questions on the side also. So first, let us hear your perspective on the topic of the same workforce planning, performance management processes. We heard both Sylvain and Soorya. Anything different that you guys are also doing, or something that people must know about at this point of time?
I'd echo the point that I think was made about regular employee listening. So that's definitely something that we're doing, and using a lot of technology enablers to be able to do that, including even looking at how we could use AI or chatbots to be able to pulse as well. So I think, that point's been well made, but that is sort of one that we're looking at. I think another area which I sort of touched on at the start of the webinar was around more partnership with property, technology, and HR, because I think they're definitely three functions that when you think about future ways of working, future of work, it's very much about, I think, those three functions coming together and thinking holistically about experience, and not where previously they probably would have been in silos. So the way that we're doing that is through an EX council. So we have representation from those functions on our EX council, but also different lines of business and functions. And that's with a view to think about, from an experience lens, what do we need to prioritize? What are some of the big experiences based on all the data that we've got that we should go after?
Yeah, no, very true, very true. Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to go on to the questions coming from our audience here, and I'll try and take it one by one, just to make sure that we address everything. And I'm taking the first question, which came directly to me actually, so it's not on the question. Subir is asking, with the second wave of the pandemic, how to boost the morale and motivation of employees because they have been kind of confined. India, if you know, has really got a very bad second wave right now, and it's really tough. In that situation, what suggestions you have for keeping the morale and motivation of the employees high? Any one of you can answer. Surya, maybe you have a comment.
So I can take it because yesterday we had a rundown of, so what I understood in India is that they have got about 140,000 cases right now on a daily basis. And, it's probably the highest peak even from the first wave, right? So in fact, some of my team members and colleagues has been sending, like, for example, Tata, they've in Pune, they have closed down. So employees are impacted and so forth. And I think, and this is where I think trust and empathy comes in, right? And as a leader. So this morning, when I started, not just myself, a lot of leaders, what we did, we texted, we use Teams, collaboration tool Teams. We try to connect to see how they are doing, if there's any support that's actually needed. We tell people that, look, you take care of your family, because there's some, for example, there are deadlines, there are reports that they need to send. And if every other person is actually falling sick in their home, you don't want to be thinking about reports and so forth, right? So you say, so all you have to do is that, I think you need to listen to them and just care for them and say that, look, you don't worry about the reports can wait. Right, take care of your family, and for us is, we make sure that we track all of our employees. This is what we do. We monitor that all our employees are safe, right? So they do have to complete the health declaration form, so that if there's any support that's actually needed, because 80% of workforce are frontline employees, right? So sometimes they do need to go to the sites. In fact, most of the time they do need to go to the site. So making sure that they are confident to be at the site, right? So they feel safe. So we ask that question, before starting the work.
Yeah, I think it's a tough time in that respect, and nothing like showing the trust and the empathy that can help them to kind of get forward and cope with this rather. I'm going to take up another question that Ruth is asking, and maybe I can combine that with Viola's question here. So Ruth asked the question that what are some of the new personal practices you have adopted during this time to ensure collaboration and trust in your team? So that's one. And Viola added to that saying that particularly the young Gen Y and Gen Z, they are overall very good at adoption of technical or technology as such, but they tend to be more concerned with connecting and maintaining trust with their leaders and colleagues. So any inputs, and maybe Laura, if you can talk about this, particularly in terms of the adoption of technology by the younger ones who are certainly good at technology, but the relationship is not coming naturally. And Ruth's question on, of course, what personal practices each one of us has adapted during these pandemic times. Laura, over to you.
Sure. Personal practices, I'll cover that one first. So I think in Singapore, we've been sort of in a scenario where actually we have been able to practice hybrid working for at least a few months now. So some of the things that I've put in place with my team is we've agreed the days of the week that we will go into the office. And pretty much I see most of my team are in on the same day. Obviously, people have personal commitments and things that mean they might not always go in. And that's the day when we do our face-to-face meetings. It's also the day when we would go for lunch, because you're able to do that in Singapore safely as well. So it's kind of reorganizing the week. Then what I've done is also talk to them regularly, actually. So very similar to when we said about listening, I do that at a really micro level with my team. So checking in with them regularly that actually what we've put in place is working. And we tend to do a daily kind of 15-minute stand-up just of any key issues, risks, things like that they might need me to help solve for. And then we do have in the diary a couple of virtual coffee catch-ups a week, which actually it's like we don't talk shop. So, you know, we're talking about what somebody's doing at the weekend, or, you know, what plans they've got with them, with their kids. We've also implemented something a bit broader, because my team is based in multiple countries. So at varying stages, I think, with second waves and lockdown. So some people are able to move around more than others. But we have also implemented something which we call My Day, which is trying to give people some time back. And actually what we then do is also celebrate what they've done. So, you know, people have been cooking, they've done exercise classes, they've been out and seen certain sites where they can do that in the countries that they're in, and sort of send those photos in, and then on my all hands call they sort of talk through that. So we're trying to think of ways to connect. Even for some of our big program go lives, it definitely isn't the same, but we have done sort of big virtual celebrations. So got senior people on to talk and sort of congratulate everybody, but also again try and make it a bit fun with quizzes and things. So trying to kind of adapt, I think, is sort of what we've done. And like I say, I talk to my team regularly in terms of whether it's working or not, because they can tell me if it is, and we change it if it's not. I think on the bit around the sort of younger generation, Gen Y, Gen Z, I think again talking to those colleagues about what it is that they need. I think in geographies where they can go into the office, that's where I think even how I describe the sort of way we're getting together face to face for certain things, to then practice that when it's safe to do so in a particular country. But I actually think some of the stuff I mentioned before, if it is more FaceTime, I think leaders can put in place things like a virtual office drop-in, and then that's the things like I mentioned where you do a Zoom or whatever video conferencing platform you use and just leave it open and have people come in. The other, I think, is being really sort of concerted effort, I think, to make sure that when you're earlier on in your career that you do give the opportunity for colleagues to have mentors and coaches. And I think, again, as a people leader, you can facilitate that connection, because it isn't always your line manager that's going to be the person that is your only go-to. I think if you do have that sponsorship or a coach or a mentor, that will really help those individuals as well, I would say. Great
inputs. And one of that resonated with me also, because as Change It All team, we also have the same practice of we call it huddle. So every day at 11:30, we just leave the Zoom line open for anybody to be able to join in. And sometimes we have no conversation. Not everyone joins every day, but that helps a lot to be able to keep connected and see what's going on. But yeah, there are a lot of practices here one could adapt, actually. And again, each city, each country is in a different stage. So one has to adapt and use a mix of different interventions to manage that. There are a lot of questions on the side here, but one thing I certainly want to ask about is, Nadia is saying, trust requires time. Trust requires time to build. And wondering about the idea of making this trust building effective. Make some nice events face-to-face, or offer small talk in small doses so that we build trust fast. Can we replace the plurality of meetings we have in everyday office working environment to something? So any thoughts on that? Because trust is something which certainly cannot happen overnight. It takes its own time, and people have different ways of doing that. I mean, I was just thinking, as I saw this question, I was thinking about one of my colleagues within Change It All, who has been working with us for over a year, and I've not even met her face to face yet. She's based in Mumbai, and but we are working very well together, very closely together. But yeah, we have not been able to meet. So I don't think trust is a problem there, but I would love to hear the panelists' point of view on building trust in a situation where you're not meeting face to face. Silva, why don't you elaborate on this a little bit for the audience?
It's an interesting one, Karunesh, because some things we are hearing from leaders that So there was a survey recently in Germany in a newspaper asking companies if they would offer their employee more flexibility after Corona than they had offered before Corona. And so we are all excited about the new work model here. So we would think, of course, everybody, 80% said we will offer more flexibility, but it was the other way around. 2/3 of the companies said no, they will not offer more flexibility. And I found that survey very insightful because I think there are still many managers and leaders who are struggling with the concept of hybrid working. And again, because I believe they see all the flaws of being in an outlier moment here where it's only remote. And so when you talk to them about the future of work, they say, so do you want more of what we have now? And that's not what I want. So they kind of confuse again the only remote work with the hybrid work. And one of the points some of them struggle with is trust, as you mentioned. And they say, how can I trust my people to still be working when they are not in the office? And that implies somehow that when you had the body in the office, you had the mind in the office. And that's at least an assumption they are making. I'm not sure that was true all the time, but they believe they had more trust because they could see people and people would be working. And they believe now people might not be working, even though you see that's exactly the contrary happening. People are working harder than before. The intensity of work has risen, and you see it's working very well. So I think there is something about belief here with respect to trust. Trust has to do with as well, will you do what you said you would do? So your say-do ratio, and that's super important as leader. That has been true before, is true now. So I think we can still deliver what we need to deliver in a remote setting. And if you see me doing what I say I will do, I think it will contribute to building that trust. So there are still ways to do that. I think some of the practice we heard before from Soorya and Laura about trying to keep collaboration and motivate people, I think that goes toward building trust. So you see many companies now doing, I don't know, as you say, cooking event or yoga, mindfulness, and it's a nice way to build a little bit of social bond with each other. But the reality at the same time is you see people very tired of not seeing each other right now. And they kind of almost said, please don't do the next social event online because I'm craving to see real people. And unfortunately, that's not something we can do right now. One of the things I've tried to do, back to Ruth's questions about practice for trust or for collaboration, is to call people. I think that's a little bit what Laura mentioned, but to have non-scheduled calls with people. So just picking up the phone and calling them outside of a scheduled call, because we spend our day now only in scheduled calls from the morning to the evening. That reduces a little bit kind of surprise moment when you bump into each other. So trying to reach people in an impromptu way has been working well for me. And I think, and to close with that, Karunesh, the other change I see right now is that people are starting to be tired of the camera as well. So we are here all on the camera, at least some of us watching each other. And you might have read the work from the Stanford University that said there is a Zoom fatigue that is transforming us in zombies, as they call that. And the reason they found is that you feel that people stare at you all the time. So you are always on, like now everybody's watching me, and that's very scary. And some people are tired of that. So we do a lot more not using the camera, even though we've been pushing for it a lot at the start to create that bond and that trust. But people are a bit tired of it right now. So I think we are going through a wave, Karunesh. And the hybrid world will be a world where we see each other. And I think that will help, back to the question from Viola, re-accelerate building trust, because as human beings, we need that sensing people and feeling people and seeing people. And that's what suffers right now.
Wonderful. And then as you were talking, I was also thinking about Claudia's point here when she's talking about, you know, the learning and e-learning face-to-face and the role coaching can play here. So I would look at this more like more than a question, it's a suggestion. I think that's something which comes naturally, that the leadership capability or the leader's capability to be able to coach and be the coach makes a huge difference in this whole transition. We could actually go on and on, but we are almost running out of time now. So just in the interest of time and to wrap it up in a nice way, before I thank everybody, I would like to put a question for all the three to answer, which is coming from Zera, saying, what have become your top 3 people priorities to ensure that evolving business operating models in your organization are addressing problems and opportunities that your businesses face? Keen on the thoughts. So as a wrap up, I would simply say that what Laura mentioned about the role of facilities, technology, and HR is the most important one right now in this transition phase. And then, of course, they have to do their bit, but the HR team will continue to work on this for much longer to be able to take care of bringing it all together. And that impact certainly is going to be also long lasting. So one by one, I would request, what will be your 2 sentences of takeaway for the audience to take away from this conversation today, and what suggestions for them to implement if they're working on something? Let's start with you, Soorya, and then I'll come to Laura and then Sylvain, please.
I think for me, Karunesh, is really designing a workplace that actually allows for the trust and the empathy, right? So this is for me more important. And actually, throughout the journey, including or listening to employees would be, when you're actually embarking on this journey, make sure that, you get socialize with your employees, right? Because at the end of the day, it is not, the company's program, it is a program for them. So that is, my takeaway and, what I would suggest everyone to do.
Thank you so much. Coming to you, Laura, what suggestions you have?
I'd say similar. I think maybe a little bit biased because my role is employee experience, but I just say experience. So measure it, talk to colleagues, involve them in the design, do human-centered design thinking. I think that is the way forward, and partner with your experience functions across the organization. I think in terms of focus for HR, I also think it's going to be reskilling and upskilling, and that sort of talent gig economy, I think, will be increasingly more important as we move into sort of future ways of working as well.
Thank you. Sylvain, please.
I think the 2 things I would focus on, one is to actively paint a picture of what you want new work to be for your company. And it will be different for every company, depending on industry, culture, business priority, location. So define what you want new work to be. People will expect that from you, employee, candidates, leaders. So define a picture that will change over time, but make a statement on that. And then the other piece, Karunesh, I think is one CEO told me remote working is not about technology, it's about mindset. And I think that's what we need to do. If we want then to implement that picture, we need to invest into change management, into mindset, into culture. Going from the office to being locked at home was very much a technological shift. We had to enable people to work remotely. I think the next stage going to new work will be a psychological shift, and we as HR, but as well business leader will have to support that process to make it a success.
Thank you so much. Great insights. Again, like I said, we could go on and on with this conversation, but it's almost, we are 2 minutes over. So thank you very much, the audience. I know that some of my colleagues or friends have joined from different time zones, from US to Europe to Asia and India, of course. Thank you very much for joining today. Appreciate the time you took, and thank you very much, the panel, Sylvain, Laura, Soorya. Thank you for joining the session today and enlightening our audience. Thank you very much.